What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Commentary for you, Jimmy Smith and Ryan Moody, our MMA show, here to recap UFC 249. I want to just start out, Jimmy, before we get into the actual fights and ask you two things. Number one, if you go back when we used to preview shows in February, we talked about maybe athletes coming out flat with no crowd and how that could impact things. I'd like to get your thoughts on that because on the main card, we only saw one actual decision. And number two, how you felt about the embedding of tweets into the pay-per-view.
Two things. Number one, I didn't think anybody really fought flat. I think by this point, I think in Brazil, just more was up in the air. You know what I mean? I think it wasn't that, I think people were distracted by the novelty of everything, right? Oh my God, this is a first time with no crowd. Am I going to be able to fly home? What's going on with this virus? Remember, the virus was just hitting. So we were just getting the patchwork responses to how it was going to work. So there were a lot of more questions. I think at this point, people knew the deal. All right, we're fighting without a crowd. We're training without as many training partners. I don't want to say the new normal, but people were just better. Fighters seemed better adjusted mentally to the conditions in this fight. I think that was the difference. So there's that for sure. The tweets during the fights, it was okay. I found it a little bit distracting. And people talk about Invicta because Invicta does that, right? They post tweets in the corner. I obviously call Invicta quite a bit. One thing about Invicta fights is they tend to go the distance, right? It's just statistically, they tend to go all 3 or all 5 rounds. So you aren't necessarily worried about that one big shot you're going to miss by glancing down on a tweet. And maybe with these, it wasn't bad. It didn't bother me that much. It bothered certain people online. It was a little bit distracting, but not bad. And also it was cherry picked for, you know, the celebrities. Everybody was somebody. I thought that was a little like, hey, if you're going to show tweets, man, let the fans get involved a little more. It was, tweets by famous people,
And Stephen A. Smith, who I believe referred to Gaethje as Garth at one point.
Call him Garth. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would fitting. I would say that if nothing else, I'm okay with the tweets in the build-up. I'm okay with them in your prelim card, whether you're on Fight Pass or ESPN Plus or ESPN, I'm okay with them then. Once you get over to pay-per-view and somebody's paying for this, essentially, off the screen. At that point, I want focus on the fight. I don't need people being promoted to me during an event that I purchased. If you want to do it beforehand, I'm fine. Don't distract me during a $60, $70 purchase.
Good point. Yeah, I think and that's another thing. You don't pay for Invicta. Invicta's on Fight Pass. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's a good point I didn't think of, which is on the prelims for free. Okay, I'll take it. But yeah, I do get kind of I don't want to slap in the face, but a little bit of a distraction for something that I paid good money for. I definitely see that that's a line that they should definitely think about making. All right, we'll do it on the prelims. I wouldn't do it on the main card, on the pay-per-view.
Countering that, I absolutely love that they've taken that next step in sport and started to show us, we saw with Jeremy Stephens, hey, here's a ring time update. This is a milestone in someone's career during action. I love that stuff. As a fan of other sports that live and die on stats and those moments where, hey, I remember, when I was watching and saw, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning break records, I would like that same to carry over to the UFC and say, hey, I remember the fight when Jeremy Stephens passed, now I can't remember who it was. Help me, Jimmy. Help me. I'm drowning. Come on.
For Octagon time?
Diego Sanchez. You didn't save me. What are we doing, Jimmy?
Yeah, I did not save you. I was thinking, like, what was the record? Yeah, 4th, I think. You came into 4th place, yeah.
Well, obviously you didn't care about that so much as I did, so okay, whatever. Moving forward.
But Dominic Cruz broke one, too. Didn't Dominic Cruz break one?
I know. He broke, he broke Henry Cejudo's character.
Touche. Well played, sir. Well played.
I didn't see a pop up, but I didn't see the pop up, but I definitely saw him breaking character. So, all right, enough banter. I'm sure people in the comment section are getting bitter since we just hate We
minutes.
have
Boom.
5 minutes in. Finally start talking about the fight. These guys are ridiculous. I hate this show. I listen to Luke Thomas instead. This guy's so bitter. Jimmy Smith just hates Dana White. It's so obvious because he fired him. I love those comments. Did Dana, we'll diverge. Did Dana actually call you and fire you? There's no way that's what took place.
Nope. I talked to Dana White a grand total of 2 times my entire UFC career.
Yeah. Everyone that I've known that's had interaction with Dana has been very limited. And I recall we had talked about this before, that you didn't have a whole lot of conversations and interactions with him. So the people that tell you how your life planned out, doing a great job. Yes. Moving into the card. 6-minute mark for those of you keeping track in the comment section. Greg Hardy, Yorgan de Castro. I was actually impressed with this fight. The only actual decision, like we talked about on the card, de Castro came out, listened to our pre-show, used the kicks, continued to kind of show Greg Hardy doesn't have a lot of experience. I think he maybe checked 1 or 2 kicks. Other than that, he just either took the kick or kind of backed out. You saw those defensive issues where Greg Hardy didn't have a lot of range. And I was really surprised when he went back to the corner that they didn't have the inhaler, but also that they let him sit down. Because once he sat down on that busted leg, his mobility and punches just diminished. I will say that I was a little bit disappointed. De Castro, midway through the second round, even maybe 2 minutes in, you could see just fell off a cliff with cardio. And I feel like if he'd kept the cardio up, he maybe could have turned the fight around. But other than that, another really impressive performance by Greg Hardy against, talent that probably should have put up a little bit more effort than he made it look like was needed.
Well, another thing, too, that very few fighters, like Douglas Lee McCann, very few fighters can win a fight with leg kicks. Some can, but it's pretty rare. Of all the years I've been covering MMA, 2 or 3 times has a fighter eaten so many leg kicks they just collapsed and that was it. It sets up everything else, right? Very few times will a jab knock somebody out. It's a setup for everything else. And the problem with Yorgan de Castro is had a good leg kick, but that didn't kickstart the rest of his offense. That should have been the starting point. You get a guy reacting leg kick, you hurt his mobility, and the rest of your offense flows off of that. And the problem is he was throwing singles, and that was it. And most fighters, even fighters as inexperienced as Greg Hardy, who haven't had a ton of fights, can grit through some leg kicks if they can land punches. Right? It sucks today. You can't walk around, but very few fighters will go, oh man, these leg kicks are so bad. I quit or I can't keep going. And so Hardy found a way through with a lot of center punches, started using the jab well, and leg kicks by themselves just weren't enough. So as you said, not only did his gas go down, it was clear through round 2 that he wasn't going to use the leg kicks to set up meaningful punches, or a kick of a different kind, or set up his takedown, or anything like that. That was it. Fighters can adjust to that well, and Greg Hardy did.
Yeah, I would agree. I would expect to stick to the game plan a little bit more so when you see how effectively it was working in the first round.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. When you find that key, you find that way in, you have to chip away at it and expand on it. And that's something Yorgan de Castro didn't do. When I picked Greg Hardy to win this, it was my thought that Greg Hardy's going to beat most mid-level heavyweights who are, tough and hit hard and all this stuff on the mid-range level. He's going to beat most of those guys. And this was just another example of that. A more experienced heavyweight, a better heavyweight who had maybe fought for a title, a former contender, that kind of thing. Leg kicks start working. That means everything's going to start working. And that wasn't the case this time. So to me, it's like, this is what you're going to get with an inexperienced guy who hasn't had a lot of high-level fights.
I think this is also when I started to take negatively to the tweets. Like, I don't need to hear that Greg Hardy is thick in a tweet posted on a screen for something I just bought. So that's kind of where, watching that back with mixed company, you're like, oh, yeah, no, they're taking tweets from random people off the internet that are also fighters. That's really just somebody's PR camp tweeting out to see their name on TV for their family. But I digress. Jeremy Stephens, Calvin Kattar. Kattar comes out before the fight. We didn't discuss this actually to what took place. We did mention in the pre-show, but Jeremy Stephens, about 5 pounds over coming in. A lot was made about that. We talked about it in the pre-show. It happens. It happened. I guess in some way we'll give a little bit of a pass given the circumstances, but he played that role smart. he went for broke. He mixed everything up well. He actually, to me, seemed to be getting the better of some of the early exchanges. But as we get into the second round, it was just they were throwing down, and it was pretty clear that somebody was going to get clipped. And Kattar was just able to overcome a lot of leg damage. He really got his lead leg tore up, and eventually landed an elbow that absolutely demolished Jeremy Stephens. It looked like at first he was going to try to get up and argue it, but he was really cut and left a little bit of a blood trail in the ring for the rest of the fights. But I was actually a little bit surprised when they came in to interview Calvin and Jeremy came back. I thought he was going to retire right then and there because, we talked about, the length of his career. We mentioned it, earlier, fourth all time in terms of octagon time, and really took a brutal clean shot twice and went down. And I was surprised that he came back and was like, oh, Calvin's future of the division, all that good stuff, because why would you interrupt somebody's post-fight speech if you didn't have something meaningful to say? Like, where do you know the guy's good? He just, turns you into a poster. So I thought that was a little bit odd.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about in-cage retirements is you really have to be thinking about it for a long time before that, because it's not the kind of decision you make, publicly in the spur of the moment. You don't want to do that. You want to go home, think about it a little bit, take some time with your family, and then maybe make that kind of decision. So usually guys who retire, it's not like it's out of the blue. You have some indication they're going to retire because it's a long process to come to that conclusion. The finish itself, honestly, I thought was great by Jason Herzog. I don't think referees get enough credit because the elbow just pasted him. Boom, and he went right down. And it gave him a few seconds to get back in it. Right? They weren't super hard punches, and a couple got through, but it was what Herzog saw was, all right, that should be the end of the fight, that elbow. Boom, he just dropped. But give him a couple seconds, see if he maybe pops back up or gets back in it somehow. And he couldn't, and he stopped the fight. That's how you're supposed to do it. Right? Somebody gets knocked down. It could be a flash knockdown. Boom, they get up and they recover. Stephens didn't. He curled up. Would still had his eyes on Calvin Kattar, but the punches were getting through and he wasn't offering anything back. So I thought it was a great stoppage by Jason Herzog. Calvin Kattar, what impressed me is he dealt with the early aggression of Jeremy Stephens very, very well. He was angling. He was aware. He was reading punches. Now, he was taking some damage, but he was reading that offense well, looking for his time to get back in it. Very high fight IQ from him.
Yes, and very composed in how he fought as well.
Yeah.
At times where we've seen Jeremy Stephens take people's composure a lot. And yes, I mean, we were both, impressed with Calvin before, but this was a real test. I mean, this could have went either way. Jeremy Stephens, a dangerous guy, but clearly just wasn't his night. Moving up the card, we have Francis Ngannou versus Renzo Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik had the concept, man. We talked about it again, pretty much. I don't know if you listened to the show, but he came out heavy on those leg kicks, and then Ngannou just has, leveling power, right? Your technique, your experience, it does not matter. He has an explosion that he can just end a fight with. And if you go back and look, I know when, you see the knockout, it's the ooh and ah moment, but at the same time, he just threw caution to the wind. Chin up, had Rozenstruik moving just directly backwards, and he came in with zero regard for himself. And it's impressive when you win that way, but you are dependent on winning that way when you do it. And even though we're going to talk each longer than this fight was, I'm not taking away from what happened, but I'm simply saying, you get a world-class fighter in there, they're not going to go directly backwards in reverse. They're going to try to angle and turn out, and he left his chin up the entire time. So impressive knockout. These are all things we've known about Francis Ngannou. When he wants to go, he can go and he can demolish somebody. But unfortunately, when you're fighting for world championships, you don't always have the guy that's going to stand straight in front of you and then move directly backwards.
It was, if you looked at the combination, it was miss, 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 boom. He threw a 3 or 4 punch combination. They didn't land the last one, left hook right on the chin, knocked him down, and the rest was icing on the cake. The reason I picked Ngannou to win this fight is Rozenstruik, the more polished fighter, the more polished kickboxer, but I didn't see a 15-minute fight where Ngannou didn't land that punch. And the thing is you're correct in that, the elite of the elite aren't going to move backwards. We're going to have, more weapons. I don't see a lot of pure strikers standing with Francis Ngannou in his prime for an entire fight without him landing that shot. At some point, he's going to do it. The guys that are going to give Francis Ngannou problems are perhaps the DCs of the world, the Stipes of the world, who go, hey, man, I'm not standing with this dude. I'm taking this guy down and making him use his other skills, which we've seen aren't really there. But pure strikers standing with Francis Ngannou, I've called him the George Foreman of MMA. One shot and it is over. He doesn't have, a well-rounded game necessarily. He doesn't have the most technical game in the world, but pure power, I put him on that level.
It reminds me of the old game where you spread your fingers out on a table, you take a knife, and you try to hit the distance in between your fingers. Like, you can do it for a little while, but the one time it hits you, it's going to hurt you. That's essentially fighting Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, that's how I see it. It's just, can you get through 15 minutes standing up without him landing that punch? And right now, I don't see anybody on the horizon that can do that. Now, I do see a DC or a Stipe taking him down, and much the same way Stipe did in their first fight. I definitely see that possibly happening. But in a division full of a lot of stand up bangers, I don't see anybody standing up and banging this guy and leaving the octagon conscious.
I know you don't listen to commentary, but there is an undertone in those fights where DC is commentating, where DC should be fearful of what's going on and what he's watching. And they almost seem to play up that, oh, you're going to have to fight that guy. And it must have came to a culmination last night, because I saw a lot of tweets about it. How do you feel about DC interacting with those fights? And, I don't want to say Joe Rogan acting as if, DC is afraid to fight him. I mean, certainly it is a fearful man. Like, let's not mince words. He's a professional fighter. He's probably got the strongest punch we've seen in the UFC. And, that's going to be something that is going to make someone hesitate. But at the same time, these are athletes. They're competitors. They want to compete against the best. And if Francis Ngannou is the best power puncher in the UFC, then there are people that are going to want to fight him. I just don't know if commentary is the time to be setting those plot lines.
Yeah, that's always going to be the issue. That's always going to be an issue when you have active fighters commentating. People they're going to fight. I mean, I talked about it with we had a roundtable last week for SiriusXM, and it's one of those things that came up where you're like, well, if you interview somebody, Chael Sonnen interviewed in the heavyweight tournament, he interviewed guys he's going to fight. He's in the cage, and Bellator talking to those guys, asking them questions and all this stuff. And you're like, really? I mean, how do you know this person isn't go, F you, I'm going to fight you soon, or whatever? It turns into kind of a WWE promo. It's, that's the difficulty, is it blurs the line of objectivity that a commentator is supposed to have. Now, UFC has embraced that line. Right. They obviously that's why I don't work there anymore, is they want to use UFC fighters. So it's going to be a constant issue as to when it becomes I'm sitting here as a commentator, or I'm sitting here as a potential opponent of that person. Or, I don't listen to the commentary, so I don't know what Joe had to say about it. But, the little ball breaking of, man, are you sure you can fight that guy? And well, that's not the time right now to deal with that. Paul Felder and Justin Gaethje in the interview, and Paul Felder told me he regrets doing that he realized that was unprofessional of him, to call somebody out or talk about fighting them when they're interviewing them post-fight. But those are issues that are constantly going to come up because of that choice. Now, once again, the UFC has decided that's okay. It's maybe worth building those plot lines and having that controversy, right? It's worth it for us. So that's the decision they've made. So the commentators themselves are put in that position. They have to acknowledge it to some degree, and they have to deal with it.
Yeah, the Felder Hooker fight was really the culmination of showing how that works, but it's not tested in any level of sport other than, kayfabe, that this is a process that can be handled, successfully. So moving forward to a commentator in Dominic Cruz and Henry Cejudo, I thought Dom did a great job with the pacing, the movement. Henry seemed almost to be mentally set on not letting Dominic Cruz take him down. And I didn't think he was executing well when he was trying to defend or trying to go in and go for a single leg. They have a clash of heads, and then Henry kind of gets reset, gets this big knee, smothers Dom. There's a questionable stoppage. I would initially say the biggest story was afterwards, we're going through this whole very estranged fight card. He comes out, cites his family and his health, kind of owns up to his character. And I mean, it's almost a shame that we've let this character mean more than the fighter, right? It's almost, to me, when I saw him last night, I felt like, you're an unwilling heel. You don't want to be doing this. And what to a lot of us should have been a very revered retirement, a fan favorite, a guy that just a couple years ago we're talking about, his house is getting burnt down. He's pulling his Olympic medals out, and these stories that were just almost, out of a movie. And now, what he's done with himself in the name of, nothing. It really didn't get him anything to be, Triple C, the king of cringe, all these things. It's almost like the fan base sighed that, okay, we're done with this cartoon character that no one can stand anymore. And we overlooked what was probably a really good fighter that, took out Dominic Cruz, who still looked a lot sharper than I thought he was going to look in there.
Yeah, I mean, last night, and the reason we're doing this at the time we're doing this is I did the post-fight show for SiriusXM, so I was up till like 3 a.m. And RJ Clifford, my broadcast partner on that show, when we were talking about Triple C's retirement, he went, good, get him out of here. Let's move on, I don't want to see that guy again. And this is a guy who beat 2 all-time greats in Dominic Cruz and Demetrius Johnson, beat 2 former bantamweight champions, TJ Dillashaw, Dominic Cruz, and Marlon Moraes is one hell of a perennial contender. And he'll almost, and like you said, people are like glad he's gone, and I understand the characters didn't really work for him that well, but that it might get overshadowed what he accomplished, that he never got over, to borrow a wrestling term. But the thing is, to me, is I thought he came out with a good game plan, relying on the leg kicks. He didn't overcommit to any takedowns. He didn't chase Dominic Cruz. Wasn't fighting emotionally the way Dominic Cruz gets everybody else to fight. I thought Dominic Cruz's movement looked good, but I thought Henry Cejudo did a good job of kicking his legs out from under him, landing the occasional shot, and not chasing and overcommitting. TJ Dillashaw interviewed him this week, and he said, look, Cruz got in my head, and I wanted to knock him out, and that's exactly what he wants. Cejudo didn't fall for that. He showed really good fight IQ. The stoppage, I didn't like the timing on it. It's a judgment call, and I understand why the guy did it. I wouldn't call it necessarily, that bad or that early. The problem is it was right when Dominic was popping to his feet. It was right when Dominic Cruz, if he had stopped, if Keith Peterson had stopped it half a second earlier, it would have been a better stoppage. I thought he stopped it right when Dominic Cruz was popping to his feet and looked like he was trying to escape. So the timing on the stoppage made the optics bad. It made it look pretty bad. So if Keith Peterson had stopped it actually a little bit earlier, I thought that would have been better. But everything, and this stoppage included, kind of takes away from the legacy of Henry Cejudo, who had a great run to end his career, if this is the end, if he doesn't come back. I think there's a good chance he does. But, look at what he accomplished at the end of his career, man. That's amazing stuff. But the character and partly the stoppage will take away from that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and watch it, you can almost see back behind him, Dana and Dominic are having an exchange, and you could almost read the body language of Dominic Cruz after Henry says he's going to retire, where he almost has this, are you serious? You're going to do this to me? You're going to take this win that, I agree with a lot of things you said there. I think stoppages are, in the moment, you have to trust the referee. They're there to protect the fighter, and we both know that. I will say that we went back to the Ngannou fight. Ngannou was leaning, was connecting when Rozenstruik was down as well. And he, it was just the ref was too far away. In this situation, I see both sides of it. Dominic was getting up, and you can't be unconscious and standing, and trying to progress forward. But also, he had taken a good amount of, I don't want to say heavy shots. He was kind of getting, pitter pattered on the bottom there, and they weren't doing a lot of damage. So, yeah, it's a slippery slope. But at the same time, you could tell Dom was upset that, he was gonna go ahead and walk away. I do also want to mention that, interestingly enough, it comes out this morning that Dominic says that Keith Peterson, who, if you listened again to the audio, sounded like he had just smoked like 16 packs of cigarettes, smelled like cigarettes and alcohol, which I immediately thought to myself, I can't think of one time in professional sport an athlete has came out and questioned the sobriety of a referee during any type of match. So I thought that was actually really interesting, and if anything is going to be done to look into that.
Number one, Keith Peterson always sounds like that. I don't know how many fights with Keith Peterson's referee. He always sounds like that. It's not necessarily that he was smoking a pack of cigarettes. He always sounds like that. Think about this. He can't be inebriated during a show, right? He can't. That's against the commission rules. Commissioners are all over the place. They're everywhere. They're outside the octagon. They're inside the octagon. Peterson is constantly dealing with them. If he really did reek of alcohol, they would have picked up on it. I'm not saying Dominic is lying or any of that stuff. I'm saying if he had, it's not as though Dominic Cruz is the only person who would have noticed that. And there are other people there that can pull Keith Peterson from his duties if he's been drinking. So it would just be dumb of Keith Peterson to reek of alcohol around his bosses. It'd be like, anybody else going to work and reeking of booze. You can't do that. They'll send you home, right? It's the same thing here. And his bosses were everywhere. They were everywhere. So to me, it's one of those things where he could have, I guess, gotten away with that, maybe with the social distancing and the masks and everything. But his bosses were all around the cage. So it would have been really dumb of Keith Peterson to do that. So I don't know exactly what to make of that.
I don't either. But as far as the main event, well, we know what to make of it. Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson. I'll just be honest. We don't always go back against our picks. You picked Gaethje. I picked Ferguson. But we both had the undertone of we felt that Justin Gaethje was in our hearts who we wanted to win, but we don't always get what our hearts want in MMA. We definitely got it last night. Justin Gaethje puts on the performance to end all performances, the absolute most perfect fight I've ever seen him do from bell to bell. You saw everything that made him Justin Gaethje, from the power punches. The most brutal hooks you could see any fighter at that weight class, but then mix it up with great movement, incredible pace for a guy that said he was only going to go 2 rounds. I don't even know who's Justin Gaethje that throws leg kicks. Maybe that was Garth. Maybe that's the Garth that Stephen A. Smith was talking about, because Justin Gaethje's out here throwing leg kicks and just, I'll tell you, every punch that he landed, you heard was clean and flush. And I actually texted you during this. I said, I don't like seeing fights like this because I know Tony Ferguson is going to be in a dark room for about 3 days after this. And I think you responded with, you were like, no, 7. These are the fights where people get seriously hurt and we don't know it until later on because they just take so much beating in their brain. And props to Tony Ferguson for staying in there. Ultimately, it got pulled at the, really, with just, a minute and a half to go. Why? I don't want to say why bother at that point, but he'd already taken just a massive beating. But Justin Gaethje putting everybody on notice that not only is he who we thought he was, he's now a little bit more diverse than that.
It wasn't just how he won, but the pacing of the fight. And, I picked Justin Gaethje to win. By the way, I went 5 for 5 on the main card. I don't recall ever doing that. But the deal to me is I thought Gaethje would have to come out guns blazing, catch Tony early, because after round 3, 2.5, it was going to be Ferguson's fight. And what did he do? He conserved his energy and landed big punches in groups or in singles that didn't wear him out. That's the amazing part, is he kept up power punches through round 5. That's craziness. That's craziness. I thought it would be, classic Justin Gaethje. He'd go right at Tony Ferguson, but if he didn't get him in the first 2 rounds, it was going to be rough. But the idea that he was able to pace himself out and get a late stoppage over Tony Ferguson, the guy with probably the strongest chin pound for pound in MMA, that's even more incredible. If he had come out and knocked him out in the first round, as amazing as that would have been, okay, that's what Justin Gaethje does. His ability to stick to a game plan, to fight smart, to fight intelligently, to not get wrapped up in the kind of fight that Tony Ferguson wanted, to keep the physical pressure on a guy who had a full camp. That's the impressive part to me. That is absolutely amazing. And of course, we're all like, Ferguson, Khabib will never happen. Oh my God. But I think Gaethje's stock went so high that he definitely positioned himself as the biggest threat to Khabib. And that's huge. That's what we want, is the best fighting the best. And the best of 55 right now are Khabib and Gaethje.
Let me also say that when you very rarely see fights like this where somebody just comes out, and I mean, for the most part, Justin Gaethje, I think, caught one uppercut that looked like it might have wobbled him. But other than that, this was a perfect fight for him. Defensively, he looked very, very sharp. Offensively, like I said, the movements were there, just continually landed with those hooks with just horrible intention. In fact, his corner had to come and say, hey, listen, you're throwing 100%. I need you to throw 80. You could tell everything he was throwing was just there to take consciousness away. And to that point, you look at a performance like that, and you have to say, if he fights like this every time out, I don't see anybody in the weight class that can beat him.
The difference is, can he stop a consistent takedown attack of Khabib? Now, he's an All-American wrestler. He can do that. But it's that physical pressure, that wearing down, and even if you stop the takedown, the pummeling, the this and the that wears your arms out. It really wears you out. So I'm not one of those people. I think Gaethje is the biggest test for Khabib, for sure. Stylistically, I think he might have what it takes. But my point is, it's a very different kind of fight. Khabib isn't going to stand at range like Ferguson did for 5 rounds. He's not. It's going to be takedown, 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 takedown. So can Gaethje keep this kind of power, right? Can he keep this kind of consistency while his arms are burning and he's trying to stop a takedown, going from grappling to striking, from grappling to striking, which is a different kind of fight than he's had to face in his last few fights. He hasn't really taken on somebody like that. Barbosa, right? Cowboy, Vic. These guys were not wrestling-centric fighters. It's a different kind of game. And so Khabib is going to offer something we haven't seen yet, or haven't seen Gaethje deal with yet. And I think that is something you have to talk about. Is that, he knocked out Ferguson. Great stuff. I'm incredibly impressed. Greatest performance of his career. I agree with all the accolades he's getting. But Khabib just fights very differently. He doesn't fight like that. So it isn't a matter of like, oh, that's what he's going to do to Khabib. Well, Khabib doesn't fight like that. So that's a question that needs to get answered as well.
Yeah, is he going to be able to win the scrambles up the way we saw, to go back to Cruz and Cejudo? When Cejudo would get him down, Dom would immediately win the scramble and get back up. That's what we've seen Khabib really be able to do, is get someone down, kind of pin them up against the cage, and then limit their escape options. And that's something that we haven't seen Justin Gaethje deal with. And I would also say, to your point, that all those accolades, all those conversations that people are having also lends itself to someone saying, yeah, I don't want to stand with this guy because I don't have the chin Tony Ferguson has. Conor McGregor's not looking at that saying, okay, let me go in there with him because that looks like it'll be fun. You can have all the speed in the world, but that power, the power wins eventually. It's just, is it going to connect or not?
Exactly. Like we say with Ngannou, like it only takes one. He's strong enough that you might be the slicker, better, more accurate striker, and yet he lands one and that's it. But look at the intriguing matchups for Gaethje now. He's in the driver's seat. Momentum is on his side. He's got the juice, right? Now he wants Khabib, but if Conor wants some and he can make a few $1,000,000 off that fight, sure. He's in the driver's seat, and every fight, because 155 is so damn stacked, is compelling. Every single fight is good. There are no bad fights. Justin Gaethje in his career is exactly where he wants to be.
I will also say the slow roll. I know that Tony tried to get into a heel hook with this, but he literally kind of tumbled in a position where Justin Gaethje was nowhere near. I don't know if you've ever seen Ken Shamrock fought a guy named Ross Clifton. Ross Clifton's unfortunately passed away, but Ross Clifton tried to roll in a very similar attempt, nowhere near Ken Shamrock. And I said, that is the weirdest thing. It's not like, it's just so unconventional to see somebody just roll. If it was an explosive thing, okay, but all you did was just kind of tumble. So I guess
somersaulted.
Yes, yeah, you did a little tumble. Like
that's not an Imanari roll. That's a little that's a somersault. That's not an Imanari roll. It's a little different.
Right, you should make contact with somebody if you're trying to roll into a heel hook there. So let's put a wrap on this, because this is probably going to be the longest show that we've done in a long time, and people will probably say it's because of all the banter we had early on. But let me just ask you your personal feelings, all things considered. You're looking at the card. It's, noon the next day. Best case scenario for the UFC, a fight card like this?
Best case scenario all the way around, right? So everything worked out well. Now, as I've said before, and I've said many times, and I'm not backing off now, it's a matter of, did all the protocols work? And we'll find that out over the next couple of weeks. But the card itself went fantastic.
Yeah, I would say that the fighters that showed up, every single one top to bottom showed up to fight. Especially shout out to Bryce Mitchell, who, good Lord, man, Bryce Mitchell's just a killer on the ground. I hope he gets those camo shorts. But everybody from an athlete standpoint stepped up and did the right thing. I enjoyed the fights. Now I have to know that the UFC stepped up and did the right thing and kept everybody safe. That's what's paramount to me, is the safety of everyone. Obviously, guys, you know by now, we will be back all week. Tons of content, tons of fights to break down. We appreciate you checking this out, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.